It is the day after MLK Day, and one group is criticizing the so-called Democratic senator from Arizona as the, quote, white moderate, actually white liberal, that Martin Luther King warned everybody about years ago, decades ago. What happened with the precious Mrs. Sinema, she set off a whole bunch of furious condemnations yesterday because she tweeted to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. Day just days after she helped destroy the Democratic Party's hopes to pass voting rights legislation that would have freed up at least a little bit more black folk in this country who have been struggling against this shit for 300 years. And Kyrsten Sinema, along with her horse, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, utterly destroyed it with their refusal to consider suspending the filibuster rule. Now, her tweet, and if Sinema is anything, she's a corporate Democrat, which means she's a Republican. I now label her as a fascist Christian because anybody who could continue to stand in the way of everything her supposed Messiah told her to do is not a legitimate Christian. She's a Christian fascist, and I'm sure she's comfortable with that. She doesn't need me to identify her. Certainly not. But her tweet stated that, quote, "Today we remember the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., end quote. And she tweeted that as progressive lawmakers urged against these glossy bullshit remembrances of Dr. King by right-wingers like Kyrsten Sinema that gloss over or ignore the radical social policy for which he was a spokesperson. They just ignore it. The precious Miss Sinema, oh, so sincere, isn't she? And the hypocritical Joe Manchin of West Virginia, both of them have gotten sustained rebuke over their opposition to simply reforming the Senate filibuster rule in order to pass what is without argument the most significant voting rights legislation since the so-called civil rights era of the 60s. And the Working Families Party. Yeah, there is something called the Working Families Party. Yes, indeed. They responded to Sinema's bullshit with archival video footage of Dr. King denouncing the filibuster. At a press conference on July 5th, 1963, King said, and it's on video, King said, quote, "I think the tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting." End quote. That was 63. What was that, 59 years ago? Now, that same quote was put out there last weekend, Friday, I think, by Bernice King, MLK's daughter. And she tagged Sinema as well as Mitch McConnell, who is another white, hypocritical son of a bitch. I mean, these Republicans like Sinema, yes, Republican like Sinema, like Manchin, like McConnell, like the rest of this dreck, who want to use the words of Dr. King in such a holier-than-thou, self-righteous way as if they stand for or work toward anything that Dr. King advocated. They don't, any more than they stand for or work toward anything that their proclaimed Messiah told them to do. I'm referring to Jesus, the rabbi from Nazareth. You remember him. So the hypocrisy of these bastards is deep and wide. It covers politics. It covers religion. I don't know how they live with themselves, but that's not for me to understand or not understand, right? Huh? Now, Sinema has been more or less boasting. A day before she made her little shit-ass speech last week, she restated her opposition to changing the rules of the filibuster, including for just a carve-out to pass those two bills, the John Lewis bill and the right to vote bill or whatever it's called, that would do nothing but strengthen voting rights at a time when the fascist Christians all over the country are out to destroy voting rights. Now, some of the defenders of voting rights, which should be all of us, it should be every white person in America. Come on, Malloy. But defenders of voting rights, including members of the King family, who, by the way, led an MLK Day march in the Capitol yesterday. But they've told lawmakers there should be, quote, no celebration without legislation, end quote. Now, Martin Luther King III, or as he's referred to here in Atlanta, Marty King, who, as far as I'm concerned, is a total asshole. He's about as far removed from dedicating his life to what his father proposed and was assassinated for as I am in dedicating my life to Himmler. Marty King is a flop and a failure. He has done nothing. I don't like him. You can probably tell. This is a guy who has sold off just about every single artifact that might represent what Dr. King was really about. Marty King and his other brother, Dexter, and one of the daughters. I mean, they are just money-grubbing assholes. And Bernice King, I think Bernice is the Reverend, I don't know. She goes about her preaching. Now, Dr. King has a couple of grandchildren who seem to be taking up the torch that was snatched from his hands with a bullet. But as far as King's children, I wouldn't give you a fucking dollar for either of the two boys, especially Marty King, who seems determined to wind up on My 600-Pound Life on TLC or something. The guy just keeps stuffing his face and coming up with platitudinous bullshit. Half the time he sounds like as ill-prepared as Sean Hannity. But he tweeted out yesterday, quote, "Today we honor my father and the MLK legacy by turning out in Washington, D.C., to call on the POTUS and the Senate to eliminate the filibuster and pass the voting rights legislation our democracy needs," end quote. Which is about as wishy-washy, worm-like a statement as anybody could make. I mean, like I say, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not the only one here in Atlanta, black and white, who feel that Marty King III is just a total asshole. Oh, it just irritates the hell out of me. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.